Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burack of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Instead of doing a normal podcast interview format, today we're going to be doing a roundtable discussion. It's going to be about everything Bitcoin, everything you ever needed or wanted to know about Bitcoin before you put any of your fiat dollars into a digital currency like Bitcoin. So joining us today, we have three special guests. Our first special guest is Trace Meyer of Run to Gold and How to Vanish. He is also a Bitcoin entrepreneur, and some of you guys will remember we interviewed Trace a year ago, and he was telling me to buy Bitcoin now, and I didn't. So I'm kind of regretting that because it was a very good speculation over the last year. We have Jeff Berwick, the Dollar Vigilante, another returning guest who is an investor, and he's also almost put a Bitcoin ATM in Cyprus, and then he almost, I think, was working on something Bitcoin-related here in the U.S. too, and he could talk about that. And our last but not least guest is Gabe Sukenik. I think I got the last name pronunciation right, of Coinapult. And he is a director at Coinapult, and he is in the Bitcoin supply chain. So thank you guys for joining me here today, and we're going to hopefully go through a lot of questions on Bitcoin.
Great.
Okay, so for those of you not familiar with the roundtable discussion, I'll just ask a general question, and any of you guys can step up to the plate and answer it. And if you have additional points to make or you disagree, just go ahead and we'll direct the discussion that way. My first question is, okay, you guys can probably list your definition of Bitcoin, but how much market traction or market penetration does Bitcoin gotten so far in regular economic activities?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first with that one. So Bitcoin's it's money over an internet protocol, and it has units of account. Those are the Bitcoins. And currently the market cap of all those Bitcoins is about $1 billion US. And there's also capital pools that are built out around Bitcoin. For example, we've got stock exchanges that denominate in Bitcoin, and there's futures traded on them and options and things like that. And if you look at some of the larger companies, one of them has a $180 million market cap. It pays about $1 million a week in Bitcoins in dividends. And so total market cap surrounding Bitcoin and the Bitcoin companies that are on these publicly traded Bitcoin exchanges is another $250 million. And then we've also got private companies like Coinbase, BitPay as a merchant processor, BitInstant, Coinapult like Gabe's company. And those have also received significant amounts of venture funding. For example, Coinbase raised $5 million in a venture round. BitPay a couple $1 million in a venture round, and each of them having valuations between like 10, 20, 30, $40 million. So I mean, there's probably all considered at least $1.5 to $2 billion of wealth in this area, and then it's also generating and creating wealth as it keeps moving along.
Yeah, speaking to Bitcoin uptake around the world, I travel a lot, and a lot of stuff I do at Dollar Vigilante is covering different parts of the world, and I've really noticed that in a lot of the countries that have some sort of capital controls, and actually nowadays almost every country has some form of capital control, but some are worse than others, including Argentina and Iran and places like that. And Argentina, in one particular instance, is really picking up on Bitcoin because they're not allowed to take U.S. dollars in or out of Argentina. And at the Dollar Vigilante, I write about how I think the U.S. dollar is going to go to zero or its intrinsic value in the next 5 or 10 years. So I really recommend people start moving towards Bitcoin, but you're starting to see it really take up in those sort of places. And then there's also a lot in the U.S. I just came back from PorcFest in New Hampshire. You couldn't buy anything at this Freedom event without Bitcoin. Everything was sold in Bitcoin. Everyone was transacting in Bitcoin. I first got into Bitcoin actually thanks to Trace Meyer in 2011 when it was around $3. And I've just seen just a tremendous explosion. The amount of people who are aware of it now. And I was, of course, all over the news. You mentioned, Jason, that I almost did this and I almost did that. And you're correct. I almost did start a Bitcoin ATM in Cyprus and actually wanted to do it in places like the U.S. But I ended up on CNBC, Fox, Bloomberg talking about it, and everyone was aware of it. So this is a huge change from 2 years ago. And of course, Bitcoin only started in 2009. So it's really on an exponential interest and awareness level rise. But at the same time, governments are starting to crack down on it, and central banks, because they see it as a definite threat to their monopoly on money, which it is. But the good news is that they can't fully stop Bitcoin.
Just to add my own 2 cents on that, in terms of the development that I've seen in the market penetration of Bitcoin, I think it's important to keep in mind how international a phenomenon it really is. The press kind of has a tendency to focus on what's happening in a lot of the Western countries in the U.S., but I think the really important market penetration for Bitcoin is going to be internationally. It's going to be developing countries that don't have these infrastructures, and I think you're seeing pretty significant market penetration so far. A lot of companies are starting to enter into that space, and people in Africa who are used to sending money at 10 to 15 to 20% can now send money for free. And I think for them, it's that type of market penetration is very, very significant.
Yeah, and to add to that, the reason that we didn't do the Bitcoin ATM in the U.S. is because there was 4 different U.S. government regulatory agencies that oversee a Bitcoin ATM, including finance, banking, money, and even telecommunications, because it uses the internet. And they kept us out of the market because they saw us as a money transmitter, and actually Bitcoin can easily overtake Western Union and all those sort of international money transferring companies very easily. And so what they said was we needed at least $25 million insurance bond to have even one Bitcoin ATM in the U.S. And so they used fascism and government monopolies to keep things like that out. But definitely Bitcoin is definitely, I agree, huge in terms of international transferring of wealth.
Yeah, that $25 million is a huge barrier of entry for a small company. I mean, I don't know how much the average size is of these average Bitcoin supply chain companies, Gabe. You could probably opine on that. But raising $25 million right off the bat is probably almost impossible for us, at least to start off with.
Yeah, well, when you look at what some of these Bitcoin companies have raised, I don't think any company has, publicly brought in more than a $5 million investment from outside investors. So to just say right off the bat, oh, okay, well, $25 million goes towards a bond so that you can legally operate. That a large part of the reason Coinapult is currently in Panama City is due to regulations like that. So yeah, it's had a real effect on Bitcoin businesses, and I think it will continue to.
Okay, guys. Well, you kind of touched on the topic there in my original question, but I wanted to see if you guys had any concrete data or any estimates about what types of bricks and mortar businesses like grocery stores, Target, Walmart are starting to accept Bitcoin, and if anyone has any figures on this.
Yeah, I can throw some figures on that. Mainly because I'm an investor in BitPay, which is one of the large merchant processors, the largest, and they recently inked a deal with Gift, which sells gift cards, and so now you can buy your gift cards straight from your mobile phone with Bitcoins, and then use those gift cards at all of these different retailers. And so, the hyper ubiquitousness of Bitcoin is, it's really starting to spread around. I think BitPay is over 9,000 merchants now that are accepting Bitcoin. We're seeing property rental companies that are letting people pay rent with their Bitcoins, which I think is a huge opportunity for some creative entrepreneur to go in and really target that market. And we also see there's a big market with things where you're sharing assets, whether it's things like Uber or Zipcar or Airbnb, things like that, because you can build right into the protocol using escrow. You can build security deposits and things like that right into the protocol. And so I think we're seeing Bitcoin starting to really get some uptake where people have to establish a form of trust with other people. And what better way to do that than to, if it's a $50 deal and both people put $100 in escrow, well, now both of them have no financial incentive. In fact, they have a financial incentive to make sure the deal goes well, so they get twice the value of the deal back from their escrow. So I think we're seeing Bitcoin increasingly used to help establish trust in transactions and things like that, in addition to its settlement currency properties that I've already talked about with the stock exchanges and the bond markets and things like that are starting to get developed out.
Anyone else anything to add, or should we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on.
Okay, this is about the creator of Bitcoin. He refuses to identify himself and take any credit. He's using a pseudonym, Shigetoshi something something. Why do you think he's refusing to step forward and take any credit? Is it he's worried about any repercussions from the government? He's worried about being the Edward Snowden type of target, or the e-gold guy, or the Liberty Dollar guy who is minting gold and silver coin? Is that the type of ramifications this guy's worried about?
Well, I've been around this for a long time. Like Jeff said, I introduced him to it, etc. When it comes to Satoshi, like who he or whether it's a team of people actually is irrelevant. Like the protocol's out now, it's out and about, it's getting its work done, and Satoshi left the project, said he had other things to work on. Chances are he's probably still around in Bitcoin land somewhere. And I don't know why we have this preoccupation with wanting to know particular individuals. Maybe it's because we have all this know your client stuff with banks. Like, for whatever reason, we want to wield the instrument of money against individuals to engage in political persecution, whether it's things like WikiLeaks or Edward Snowden or whistleblowers or things like that. And so, any time we've had great individuals push the human race forward, they've encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds. Whether it's Copernicus not wanting to publish heliocentric theory, or Galileo getting confined to house arrest, or any other number of brilliant minds that have added immensely to humanity. Nikola Tesla, for example, inventor of our electricity system. All of these people, we saw how these mediocre minds and these really small people dealt with people who introduced a radical invention that has pushed the human race forward. And so I think Satoshi, whoever he or the team may be, they kind of see that that's how these small people react, and to protect their entrenched status quo. And so, they're just keeping that veil of anonymity, which I think is probably a smart thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very smart. This Bitcoin is a complete competitor and will actually deride the entire global financial and monetary system. And those people who run those systems are very powerful and very dangerous people. And if I was Satoshi, I would never come out in public and say who I was. And like Trace said, it doesn't really matter. I was on Fox Business, and that was their thing that they used against me. That they said, well, at least with the Federal Reserve, I can go to Ben Bernanke's house and ask him questions. Well, that's very Soviet. It's very Soviet-style central planning that people would even want that to begin with. You want this guy in a beard in a secret room to decide how much money is created and counterfeit as much money as he wants and to manipulate the economy. That's a crazy idea. And what Satoshi's done, whoever he is or whichever group it is, I think they'll be looked back upon in human history as true heroes. And whether we ever really truly find out who they are or not, I think they're going to go down in the history books as some people, just like some of the people that Trace just mentioned, as being great people who moved the human history forward and moved it forward in a positive manner.
Yeah, I think it was very smart. I'm not a Bitcoin expert. I'm actually here to learn on this. That's why I'm asking all these questions. But I think it was very smart for the creator or creators to not come forward. Because the governments they don't want a free market on currency. They don't want competing currencies. They don't even want a gold standard. So they want whatever form of money they tell us the sheeple to one.
Well, you just look at the last Bitcoin conference, which I think Trace went to. I was going to, but I missed it in San Jose. The organizers of the event are actually now being persecuted by the government just for holding a Bitcoin event. So you can just imagine what kind of Edward Snowden or Bradley Manning Satoshi would be at this moment in time. So I think it's very, very smart of them to keep quiet about their true identities.
Yeah, and I also think it just kind of, it just fits with the Bitcoin mentality. I mean, Bitcoin was built on this idea of decentralization and no single point of failure. And if that's kind of the whole ethos of the whole project, I mean, it only seems natural that, you know, whoever this guy or these people were, you know, why set themselves up as a target? You know, they know what the system would want to do with that. So keep it decentralized, and it really doesn't matter who they are.
Well, and another point to hit on with this is anytime there's a major deflationary event, and I wrote a book on this before Bitcoin even existed called The Great Credit Contraction and how it started. When we have these massive deflationary events, it impacts the institutions that operate on debt negatively. But if you operate on equity, there's not really a problem. And what are the institutions that operate primarily on debt? Well, it's governments, and it's the banks that are close to them. And with Bitcoin, and Gabe and I, we were playing some games, a few months ago when WordPress made the announcement that they were going to accept Bitcoin, a huge free speech company, the open source software, which changes ideology, and perhaps ideology is the only thing stronger than money in influencing human action. And while we were playing our game with Gabe, we were kind of discussing this, and I was like, you know what, there are people in Bitcoin land, and if Bitcoin becomes this major world reserve currency, kind of a dollar, a euro, a yuan, a yen, and a Bitcoin as a currency for the internet, if it becomes that big in the next 10, 15, 20 years, then there's some early adopters in Bitcoin who could very well have net worths that are double Rockefeller or Carnegie's equivalent net worths. So, I mean, we're talking the potential for wealth transfer and the potential for wealth creation in this area is massive, like bigger than the world's ever seen, and that's because it's such a disruptive tool. And it also attacks the current system, the current Leviathan, where it's very weakest. It attacks right at the carotid artery. And, it's a kryptonite dagger to the state because it's so deflationary in its impact. And I think that this is, it would be very smart if you're going to create something like this and benefit from it, then you don't necessarily want to let everybody know that you're worth $200 billion or $500 billion in current monetary value. And there very well are people in Bitcoin land, if Bitcoin becomes that large, who will wield that type of wealth. And they'll be able to do it from the shadows and be able to do it equity-based instead of debt-based. And so, it's very disruptive, and I think it has huge political and even geopolitical implications.
Okay, well, we'll move on to my next topic, and you guys briefly touched on some angel investors and some Bitcoin startups. So we have angel investors and venture capitalists are starting to pour money into Bitcoin-related companies, and the Winklevoss twins, the guys who are involved with Facebook, everyone knows the lawsuit story with Zuckerberg, are starting a Bitcoin-like ETF, so I think people can start trading an ETF that holds Bitcoins or something along those lines. Where is this money going into these startups, and what types of companies are these startups? What do they do in the supply chain, guys? And why should investors even consider giving these companies money?
Well, I can say just from my perspective as an entrepreneur, there's a tremendous amount of capital flowing towards this sector. I've been approached by numerous people who have Bitcoin conferences, that have VC conferences, venture capital conferences, and they're just begging people to come with ideas because they have money that people want to throw at it. So for all the entrepreneurs out there, I would say this is one of your biggest opportunities you've had in years, ever since actually the internet. The internet was the last time we had an opportunity like this to create massive amounts of wealth. It's not going to be easy, and just as with the internet, in the first few years of the internet, there was so many people saying, oh, this won't work. So many companies said, oh, we'd never go on the internet. What if one of our employees lost their laptop? We'd lose all our secrets and all our information. But there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, but there's also a tremendous amount of risk, because governments and central banks, especially central banks, are the most dangerous institutions on earth by far. They're anti-human, they're anti-freedom, and they will not go down without a fight over this. And just the other day, Thailand, the Central Bank of Thailand, tried to make Bitcoin illegal, which they can't, but they can try to find people who are using it somehow and go after them. So that's the old world, right? We're actually emerging, and the internet was the beginning of this. It started with the old world. In the last century, it was all statism and collectivism and central banking. And Ron Paul said the last century was actually the century of total war, and it also coincided with the century of central banking. So we're transitioning from this very violent, very evil system to a truly beautiful system. It's not going to be easy, but there's a ton of opportunities. And for all those entrepreneurs out there, just start thinking. And Trace already brought up a few ideas, and I bring them up all the time at our newsletter at the Dollar Vigilante. I think of good Bitcoin ideas all the time. But you have to be careful. You have to do it with the right jurisdictions, and try to make it as less physical as possible. And Gabe can maybe speak to that, because they just, as he said, they just moved a large portion of the company, or maybe even the entire company, to Panama, because they're scared to be doing Bitcoin things in the U.S.
Yeah, Jeff, I mean, I don't know if scared's the right word, but we certainly see the advantage of, less bureaucracy, less government, lower taxes, and a better ability to reach our own clients. We want to be able to provide the best service as possible to the people that need it the most. And so we moved our entire team of 8 people to Panama, in Panama City, and it's much, much easier to do what we want to do from outside of the U.S. than it is with inside.
And Gabe, can you extrapolate further on Coinapult, because you didn't get a chance to talk about your business now. So talk about what Coinapult does within the Bitcoin supply chain, and then maybe talk about the Bitcoin supply chain in general, because I'm not sure I fully understand it, and I'm sure our listeners are interested in hearing about it.
Okay, sure. So Coinapult has pretty much 3 primary purposes. Our first is to help customers buy and sell Bitcoins. Our second is to provide e-wallet services for your Bitcoins. So you can basically safely store your Bitcoins, and you can send them via email, SMS, or from Bitcoin address to Bitcoin address. And our third function is basically to help merchants process payments. So it's a lot of B2B type business. And basically it's everything that you would need within a Bitcoin economy. We're like a Bitcoin financial services company. The second part of that question you wanted me to get to? Oh, in terms of the supply chain for Bitcoins. I guess the supply chain, yeah?
Oh, I was just going to say, Gabe, like, are the other companies that are getting venture capital besides Coinapult, are they very similar business models to you, or do they do different things in the Bitcoin supply chain?
I would say the companies that are receiving funding right now for their Bitcoin businesses, what's most important in Bitcoin world is to build the infrastructure around Bitcoin. So you see companies that try to make it easier to buy and sell. You see companies that try to make it easier to process payments, make it easier for all sorts of different things that you'd want to use payments for, remittances, insurance, escrow. So all these different pieces are starting to come together, and that's where the venture capitalists want to be. They want to help build the infrastructure for a Bitcoin financial world.
Yeah, looking at it. Getting a little interference. Is this better? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Looking at it kind of from a different vantage point, because Gabe's, he's one of the companies that has, looked for venture capital. I'm in a different position. I fund the companies that are looking for for the venture capital. And so far I've funded Bitcoin Magazine. That's where we create a monthly magazine that educates people about Bitcoin, and we create an audience and a community, and we sell advertising, etc. And that's done very well. It's helped spread Bitcoin news and train people about it all around. I've also funded BitPay. I was part of the seed round and also part of the additional round where Peter Thiel came in with $2 million. In BitPay, they're a merchant processor, so they help merchants accept Bitcoin. And it's a very powerful value proposition for a merchant because there's no account setup fee, there's no monthly fee. You pay 99 basis points only whenever you receive a Bitcoin transaction. They handle all the processing and then convert it into dollars and direct deposit your bank account in whatever percentages, or they'll just send you the Bitcoins. And they'll also deposit euros or Swedish kroners, South African rands, a whole bunch of currencies. So they make it very flexible for merchants, very easy to accept Bitcoin. And another advantage of that is they only charge 99 basis points, and there's no fraud, there's no PCI compliance, there are no chargebacks or anything. And so they're significantly cheaper. A credit card charges 200 to 400, 500 basis points usually, so they're significantly cheaper, and they don't have the time and the privacy concerns and PCI compliance, etc. So I think they're a really good play. Other options for VC funding out there, because I actually get approached by a lot of entrepreneurs in Bitcoin land, and I like to fund them because, people attracted to Bitcoin, they usually, have a particular political philosophy. And when they go and take money from these VCs, well, they have to start playing, by the VC's rules. Whereas, they come get money from me, and I give them a lot more latitude in how they approach their business and stuff like that. And so and these VCs, like I was meeting with a partner at he's a partner at a $670 million VC fund, and he came to our Bitcoin meetup group, looking for investments, and I went and had lunch with them, and surprisingly, I don't think they really have that much of a clue about the market. I don't think they really have that good of a feel or an understanding of what needs to be built out, and they can't spot the opportunities because there are a lot of opportunities in Bitcoin land. Like there are a lot of entrepreneurs who want to solve needs. For example, I just closed I was the lead investor on a seed round. We just closed it a couple days ago. We're not going to publicly announce it for a couple of weeks, but we raised another $500,000 for a company, and there's nobody else that's like funding or building out this particular part of Bitcoin, and it's real surprising to me because it really needs to be done. And there's just a lot of opportunities like that in Bitcoin land that I think there's a lot of like $10 $100 million ideas out there, and it's part of just being able to spot them. But because it's such a disruptive area, people for whatever reason can't seem to see it. And but I think that's going to change, and those people that are early in this space, they're going to really reap the rewards of being first to market, because they're going to build up huge barriers to entry to other people, whether it's other merchant processors or things like BitInstant or Coinapult. It's very difficult for people to compete with them now because they have all the brand recognition, etc. So I think that there's just a lot of opportunity to invest in this space, and there are a lot of good ideas, and people aren't, people who can spot the good ideas, they're not really going to go share that with the VCs and stuff, And so if there are any Bitcoin entrepreneurs out there that, are looking to get funding or whatever, like, hey, come to me, because I want you to be able to build your baby, and I'm philosophically aligned with a lot of people in Bitcoin community, and so that's kind of how I see it.
Anyone else anything to add?
Nope.
Okay, well, my next topic to talk about here is related to Edward Snowden and a lot of the stuff he revealed about how the U.S. government National Security Agency is tracking all people's online activities, all online banking, all website viewing, etc., and storing all this information. Is there any type of technology developed related to Bitcoin that can prevent the NSA or other government agencies from tracking what people are doing with the Bitcoin, what people are buying, if they're buying, how many Bitcoins they have, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Jason. Mainly because I run howtovanish.com, also, a very privacy-oriented site. And there's definitely tools that are in Bitcoin land or have come out of the Bitcoin protocol, which can greatly increase your ability to stay private. For example, virtual private networks. If you pay for a VPN with your credit card, boom, they all of a sudden know that it's your particular identity tied to that VPN account, right? If you pay for your VPN with Bitcoin, you've now reduced an additional layer. Sending emails, the big issue there with the Snowden release has been, all of the metadata that they're scooping up and putting in the database, the to, the from, the date, the subject line, the other metadata in there, the servers it's being sent out from, etc. Well, out of the Bitcoin protocol, we've got a new kind of experiment called BitMessage, and BitMessage allows you to basically strip out all of that metadata, and so you can still have email type functionality, but you don't have all that metadata. It's really quite a great project. And I think we're going to continue to see more and more stuff like that get built out from Bitcoin, whether it's things like BitMessage or maybe using the private keys from Bitcoin to control or secure stuff like smart property, and other ways for people to protect their privacy. And I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, I would just add to that the Internet, again, has enabled all of these things. And the Internet is the first truly anarchic environment. It's truly uncontrolled environment. And it's a beautiful thing. I think anyone watching this or listening to this on the Internet realizes how beautiful it is. And the governments have always been trying to control these things. You look at what's happening with Edward Snowden. They don't like any of this information to get out. They want to track all the information, but they're losing, and they're going to keep losing. There's hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of 13-year-old boys around the world, and girls, I hope, that can hack around all these things, and they're trying to retain control. There's going to be a complete collapse of this paradigm of government violence, theft, spying, jails, putting people in jail for victimless crimes. All these sort of things are all collapsing, and they're trying to keep control, but they can't. And many of the things that Trace just mentioned are all open source software, and it's a beautiful thing. Us as humans now can have completely open ways of doing things, transacting, communicating, doing anything really, and it's just amazing. And it's an amazing time to be alive. And Bitcoin is just one additional thing that has come from the Internet that is going to free humanity. And I know a lot of people are kind of scared of what would happen if we didn't have government. Well, this is it. The Internet is what would happen without government. Bitcoin is what would happen without government. And I write the Dollar Vigilante, and of course I talk about the coming collapse of the US dollar and all fiat currencies. And people used to ask me, they'd say, well, Jeff, you keep saying that's going to happen, but what will come after it? And I said, well, I bet private enterprise will come up with a solution. So I was very personally vindicated once I heard about Bitcoin. The private market has come up with a solution to money and banking. And you can become your own bank with Bitcoin. Money is private. It is an asset that is no one else's liability, unlike fiat currencies and all other forms of the current monetary and financial system. And it's a beautiful thing. So the more that people catch on to it, and they are catching on to it, you cannot stop this now. The momentum is too big. There's going to be struggles, but we're going to get past all of this horrible statist and collectivist violence and theft and spying, and move on to a greater world thanks to Bitcoin and the Internet.
Yeah, and also to kind of hit on the earlier point about the institutions that are affected by deflation, well, the surveillance state is hugely affected by deflation in a negative way because they rely on debt for their budget. And so we saw with the European debt collapse, we saw one of the countries over in Europe, they had to shut down 3 million of the cameras because they couldn't fund them. And what Bitcoin does and what we're going to see as a result of the Snowden stuff, we're going to see the fundamental way stuff is built in the Internet. We're going to see that change. and it's going to become even more difficult for them to try to retain this type of control. And what's going to and even without those changes, it's still a force multiplier. It exponentially raises the costs on them in order to search through and store and archive all this stuff, and the cost of protection plummets. And what even in some of these Snowden leaks, we're seeing that they're only able to retain the data for 24 hours or 5 days in some cases, and that's because there's just so much data. And with Bitcoin, you can, you can, and encryption in general, you can just exponentially increase the amount of data on them, and so it really just makes them, they have to build Bluffdale after Bluffdale after Bluffdale. They just have to keep spending more and more and more money, and where's the return on investment? And because they're a bureaucracy, they don't have the economic calculation problem solved the same way a free market does, and eventually they lose control of the currency with something like Bitcoin or some other advancement that comes out of this, and then they lose all their funding, and the deflation just clears out those bad weeds, and the market produces the goods and services that people demand. And I don't think that people demand this surveillance state, because how do they get funding? They get it through violence and coercion and theft through taxation. And if they didn't, who would pay $500 a month for this surveillance state voluntarily? I don't think anybody. And we're going to see, because of things like Bitcoin, we're going to see what people will pay for it.
Except for the people, Trace, who profit off of it, who profit from the status quo, the people getting the transfer payments, the people getting the big government, who are government employees, who are making big checks each month as paychecks and stuff like that. So yeah, the welfare warfare state is the one who's making the majority of the money, the military-industrial complex and all these things. And that's why, like you said, they need to run the debt-based system, because they need to devalue the debt.
Yeah, but those are the people benefiting from it. I'm talking about who's going to pay for it, because right now they're able to just extort the money from people. You have to pay for it, whether you want to or not. But with things like Bitcoin coming out and the debt collapse and credit contraction that we're in, these institutions that fund and perpetuate themselves, because that's really all inflation does. It perpetuates the status quo. And so, as this deflation really begins to take hold, it's going to sweep away all these bad weeds, regardless of what they want.
Okay, the mainstream media, whenever it brings up Bitcoin now, I'm not sure if you guys have noticed this, they're talking about an SEC investigation. So what are your guys' opinion of this investigation? Is it legit, or is it just more nonsense that the mainstream media is reporting on?
Yeah, this is actually a legit investigation against Trendon Shavers. He was running a Ponzi scheme, and he used Bitcoin as a medium of exchange in that. So they're upset with him not because he's using Bitcoin. They're upset with him because he was running a Ponzi scam, and he was running a Ponzi scam, and a lot of people lost money in it.
Gabe, is that right? Because you were speaking to me off recording there about that. Is that your opinion too?
Yeah, basically that's just one individual who is, he could have been running a scam and just about anything else. He happened to choose Bitcoin, and there's no reason that the SEC, hypothetically shouldn't be looking into it. So, it's the one thing that's important to note is it's not that the SEC is investigating Bitcoin; it's they're investigating this particular individual who was running this fund which took Bitcoin, and he was a criminal. So.
Yeah, that's the one thing I would also like to add is every single time, and we've heard this over the years, there's always been some sort of Bitcoin scandal, but it actually never has anything to do with Bitcoin. It just has to do with certain con men and thieves, which happen everywhere, and they especially populate the entire financial system at the highest levels today. But Bitcoin itself has never been hacked. It's never been any sort of scam, nothing like that. And people tend to equate it because a lot of people just still haven't caught on to what exactly Bitcoin is. So they'll see a headline, they'll say, "Oh, SEC investigates Bitcoin person." Well, it's not Bitcoin, it's the person, and that's going to happen in any industry. There's always going to be some con men and sociopaths.
Yeah, and the mainstream media is finally starting to report on some of the corruption in some of the other large industries. You have these large fines coming to J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs over manipulating the aluminum market and copper and things like that. So hopefully this continues where the light is shed on more corruption in the larger industries, because I'm an investment analyst, guys, during my full-time job, and there's just a massive amount of corruption pretty much everywhere in every single industry. It's just unavoidable right now, the way things are, the status quo.
Well, there's way more in anything to do with the current monetary and financial system than there is in Bitcoin, just because of the nature of the system. The whole system is a theft-based system. And so it's really, and I don't think the government's going to really go after those people. They're all tied in together. So I wouldn't look forward to the SEC or the government going after any actual financial, like any, HSBC just got a $1 billion fine for money laundering for plant traffickers and entrepreneurs, they call them drugs, and that $1 billion was just a drop in the bucket. So they slap each other's hands every now and then, but it's really something like the free market, something like the internet, things like Bitcoin that can really make it so it's very hard to do corrupt things because it's very open, and things and people and many entrepreneurs will come up with many solutions. There'll be Bitcoin insurance companies, I'm sure, who will insure you against the loss of your Bitcoins. There's another idea, so the free market itself actually is a way better system to actually control theft and corruption.
Yeah, and it could weed out the competitors to Bitcoin, too, because I believe there's a bunch of competitors that like Litecoin and I think a couple others that are trying, and those guys just don't have the network effect yet, right, that Bitcoin does.
Right. Yeah, but, if Bitcoin loses, like right now Bitcoin's driving down the costs in terms of time, money, and privacy. But there are aspects of Bitcoin that could be further increased, such as the privacy aspect. We could introduce something like Zero Coin, which will automatically mix coins. That'll make it more fungible. And so that would make Bitcoin even more private. And so if Bitcoin does not integrate that into the protocol, then some other coin will. And then that coin might be more competitive than Bitcoin is. And then economic activity will move over to that coin. So, Bitcoin doesn't have this race won by any means. It does have first mover advantage as a cryptocurrency, but it's not going to retain that crown unless it keeps offering the most value proposition, which means the lowest cost in terms of time, money, and privacy.
Okay, so I got a couple more questions here to ask in the interview, and a couple of them are comparing Bitcoin to gold and silver. And then they're about the future of Bitcoin. So we'll talk about the gold and silver ones first. Can Bitcoin ever be a long-term store of value, in your opinion, like gold and silver, or what issues does Bitcoin need to solve in order to accomplish these?
Well, Trace can answer that as well. He writes a lot about gold, but I would just say that at this current moment in time, I personally use precious metals more as a store of wealth, and I use Bitcoin more as a transaction mechanism. But as Bitcoin becomes more and more used and actually becomes more and more real money that you can use anywhere, you could actually see it become a store of wealth. And a really cool thing about Bitcoin is you could actually end up, if you just memorize your Bitcoin address and password, you can actually store your entire wealth in your own brain. And crossing borders with wealth would become much, much easier. And that's actually one of the problems with precious metals is that they are physical. And when there is still governments running around the world doing criminal acts, there's a chance that can be absconded. But with Bitcoin, you actually can store your entire wealth in your own head, which is a fantastic and amazing concept.
Yeah, I mean, I've written a lot on the relationships between Bitcoin and gold. I wrote an article called Why Bitcoin is Tangible. And in there I make the argument that tangibility, that has to do with whether something's real or definite, and not necessarily whether something's cerebral or physical. And so Bitcoin is real in the sense that it's not like a Puff the Magic Dragon that's an illusory thing. You've actually got something that's defined in mathematical code. And like gold, Bitcoin is intrinsically limited in amount by its characteristics, by its internal characteristics. Bitcoin by numbers, gold by atoms, instead of external characteristics like counterfeiting laws or Ben Bernanke's feeling of the day. And so I really see when talking about store of value, gold is centralized in terms of place and time because it's made up of atoms, and that lends it to being able to be confiscated, whereas Bitcoin doesn't have that kind of aspect to it. So Bitcoin is much more censorship resistant, and as long as you're able to exchange your Bitcoins into gold or silver, etc., then you've got what you want with it there. And then also, like, there's a third type of asset that I think completes this trifecta, and that would be real estate. So Jeff, he talked about crossing borders, so getting around currency controls with Bitcoin, which would be hard to do with gold or with real estate. But if you're able to store wealth between all of these, because commercial real estate's really just kind of a play on interest rates, you're able to allocate capital in a way that you're able to keep it safe and secure and choose for what you need at that particular point in time. And so, I mean, I don't see Bitcoin becoming 10% of worldwide wealth or anything like that, but because it can't be confiscated, it massively changes the rules for all the other assets, because it can't be confiscated and it's censorship resistant. And just from those two properties, it's a unique commodity that there's nothing else like it besides the other crypto coins like Litecoin, etc., in the world. And the value it provides for transferring value over distance, it's irrespective of price. Whether it's a nickel or $10,000, you can still transfer any amount of money anywhere to anyone at any time, and it can't be frozen or confiscated or impeded in any way. And that's massively going to change the rules of the game for portfolio management. And, if it makes up 1% of portfolios or whatever, everybody will have their own risk tolerance. But I definitely think it's going to be a store of value over the next 3.5 years or so, and then it might turn into a major medium of exchange that'll rival Visa, PayPal, bank wires, etc.
Do you envision then any type of symbiotic relationship where there's a gold or silver backed Bitcoin, or do you think that's unrealistic then?
I don't think it'll be a gold or silver backed Bitcoin, but I think it'll be like an exchange where you're going to be able to trade your Bitcoin for your gold and vice versa. And that physical gold will be held to the highest standard. For example, on my site, Run to Gold, I like goldmoney.com because all the bars are audited, they're ultrasound tested, every single one. If they find anomalies, then they melt the bars down and recast them. So, I think that's where it's that convertibility, and so where somebody's going to be the Bitcoin to gold spot price, and the gold is going to be actually there instead of all this hypothecated and rehypothecated and unallocated paper gold that we have out there in ETFs where it's it's just paper. So
yeah, I've seen your YouTube video, Trace, on the GLD going through the prospectus. Yeah, for our listeners out there who haven't, go look at Trace's YouTube video on that. He goes exactly through what's wrong with the GLD.
Yeah, so I think that there's going to be a service provider that creates this Bitcoin to gold spot market, and that's gonna be a major piece for setting interest rates free instead of having them centrally planned.
So you think then Bitcoin will trade as a currency pair potentially then with gold or the euro or the yen, so people could go long Bitcoin and short the yen or things like you expect to see that then?
Yeah, well, CoinSetter, they're already working on those types of instruments, and Bitcoin is already trading as a currency, because you're trading dollars or euros, etc. for Bitcoins, and getting currency pairs and contracts for difference and futures options and things like that. are just going to further build out these capital pools, which is, as Bitcoin gets more and more established as a currency. And remember, like a world reserve currency, it doesn't just happen. Like, it claws its way to that position of dominance through sheer economic force. And Bitcoin is, it's only 4.5 years old, and look where it's at, in spite of, like, the most powerful money and governments in the world not liking it. Imagine as it keeps gathering in this network effect. It's going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I would add just to that I'm a big fan of goldmoney.com. I've had Trace Meyer on. I have a podcast called Anarchast. You can find it on the internet, obviously. And I also had James Turk, who runs goldmoney.com. And he's been looking into it a lot about how to integrate Bitcoin so you can buy and sell gold and silver for Bitcoin. Of course, it's just a lot of government regulations. That's all that's holding it up. As usual, government regulations and all sorts of uses of violence are slowing down our ability to continue to progress as humans. But he's definitely been working on it. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other people working on it as well. I don't know if there really needs to be a gold or silver-backed Bitcoin. I don't even know how that would even work. I think that actually is almost doesn't make any sense because there's a reason to have both at this moment in time, at least. And both have different properties, and to tie the two together actually probably creates more negatives than positives. Although, who knows, maybe some entrepreneur will figure out a way to do it that makes sense.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I've spent significant amounts of time being invited by both Jeff and James Turk over there to discuss Bitcoin with them. And, James, I've learned a lot about monetary science and theory from him, and I think I've actually taught him a lot about money and science and monetary science and theory as it applies in the information age. And so, if they can overcome some of these regulatory issues, I think they're in a prime position to produce like an exchange for the gold to Bitcoin, and I think it'd solve a huge market need. And like Jeff says, I think that, a gold-backed Bitcoin, I think that's kind of like asking how big is yellow. Like, it just doesn't really make much sense to me.
Well, I asked the question because I was curious about it, because I had seen like people talk about it. Well, why don't we just use Bitcoin then as money certificates with precious metals backing up in the bank, as the old gold receipts, what
right.
money, paper money used to be.
Yeah, right. And I suppose you could use it like that. But that just kind of highlights the nature that there's so many, like, it's just such a complex technical subject.
Okay, I have two more final questions, and they're really broad picture stuff, so maybe they're about the future, obviously. What issues or questions do you think need to be answered for the general public before a lot more people decide to embrace Bitcoin and other digital currencies?
Well, I think just briefly, I think as soon as you start to use Bitcoin, and many people still haven't, it expands your mind. It blows your brains out of your head thinking about the possibilities, thinking how beautiful it is. I'm a businessman. I'm an entrepreneur. I have many different businesses. Opening bank accounts around the world is the bane of my existence. I've constantly have funds held over just ridiculous reasons for know your client and all these sort of things. The second you just start to use it, you will realize how amazing and how important this could be in the future for humans, for being able to transact. So that's really the only thing I would say to that question is, if you haven't even just begun to use Bitcoins, do what Trace Meyer did with me. He actually walked me through it. He said, you gotta see this. And I said, what? He said, here, go to this website, open a Bitcoin wallet. And I did, and it was open in 1 second. No documents required, with some anonymous name. And he said, okay, I'm going to send you some Bitcoins. And he sent it to me. 10 seconds later, there's Bitcoins in my account. And he goes, okay, go to this website and buy something with it. And I did, all in about 30 seconds. Once you start to see the possibilities, as opposed to opening a bank account in any country on earth or trying to transfer money anywhere to anyone at any time, and for the cost, not only just the cost, but the time, which is also just as important to me, is your mind will be expanded. And that's really the thing. If you haven't used it, just start using it, and you will start to see what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because it's a new technology, and I mean you don't learn about copy and paste all at once, right? With using a computer, like it distills on you like the dew in the morning. It just kind of appears there drop by drop, and you just have to use it. And I helped Jeff. We walked it through via Skype. We just kind of did it one afternoon, and now he's spreading the Bitcoin message all over the place. And that's really how this spreads, is that, people learn how to use it, and they get comfortable with it, and they begin teaching other people, and then they're like, if they're a landlord, they're like, I'd like to get paid my rent in Bitcoins, and so they teach their tenant how to pay them Bitcoins instead of writing them a check or getting a money order or whatever. And so that's really how it spreads, and they need to remit money back home or something like that, and they're like, I could use Bitcoin and not pay $50 out of $500 to Western Union. And so the economics really kind of drive the adoption of that, and it's really just, getting comfortable with the technology. And it should be noted, Bitcoin is very complicated, so there's a hurdle intellectually to getting it. And even if you can get it intellectually, there's another hurdle where you have to get it technically. And we're kind of, as Bitcoin, when it first started, when I first started recommending it at about a nickel, it was so difficult to use. But, we kind of wanted it that way because it kept particular people out of it. And, as we build out all of this infrastructure and stuff and it gets easier to use, we bring more and more users into it. And that's how it can grow in a sustainable and a scalable way. So, it kind of calls out the people who are willing to put in the effort. And if they put in the effort, like I said, I publicly recommended it at $0.25. Now it's $100. That means if you'd put in $25,000, it'd currently be about 30 to 50 million. So there's profit incentive for people to get in and do the hard work and educate themselves on it, etc.
Yeah, I see direct parallels to the internet. When I was around during the very early years of the internet in 1994, I started an internet company that was worth $250 million by the year 2000. But in the very early years, 1994, 1995, I had a website company, and I'd go around to companies and I'd say, you should get a website. And they'd say, what's a website? I go, it's on the internet. And they'd say, what's the internet? And look at it today. And I think that's exactly where Bitcoin is right now.
Very good. You kind of already answered this, but I'll ask my last question anyway. What do you see big picture for the future of Bitcoin and other digital currencies? Do you see them as the free market then, as the free market solution then, as the ultimate competing currencies, or do you think the governments are going to try to stop it and figure out ways to stop it?
Well, I'll let Trace have the last word. I see Gabe is logged off at this point. We're not just hogging the microphone here.
Yeah, I think he got disconnected on the phone.
Yeah, he's in the third world countries in the U.S. So,
he's in New York City. I think he's in one of the most overregulated areas even in the U.S.
Probably not allowed to be on for a certain amount of time or something. But really, for the future, for me, I write the Dollar Vigilante. I think all fiat currencies are going to collapse in the next 5 or 10 years. So get into Bitcoin now, and you will have a massive head start, because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be panicking over the next few years as currencies collapse. We saw what happened in Cyprus. I think Japan is going to be the first major currency to collapse, the yen, in the next few years. We're going to see actually a wave of people running towards this. So the sooner you get into it, I think the better off you'll be, and you'll already know how it all works, and you'll be able to explain it to people, and you can also profit from it.
Yeah, I go kind of right along with that. I wrote The Great Credit Contraction about 5 years ago now, and everything's playing out like it's a script in a movie, right? Like almost to the T, everything in there. And it's, as this continues to happen, because it took hundreds of years to build up from going from gold in your hand to fiat currency and fractional reserve banking. That was a great credit expansion. And now with the contraction starting, it's all going down the liquidity pyramid, and everything's evaporating away. And chief at the heart of this is the gold price suppression scheme that Gatta writes about. And as a result of that, we're going to see all types of economic dislocations. Interferences with economic calculation has caused huge misallocations of capital. There's going to be a lot up for grabs all at once. It's pandemonium and chaos. Just look at Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, MF Global, Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, like all of these massive accounting scandals. And that's another thing we haven't talked about. Bitcoin's a triple entry bookkeeping system, so our accounting is going to be much more accurate and useful for performing economic calculation than the double entry bookkeeping that came out in the mid-millennium that led to the rise of corporations as they currently exist. And so we're headed into this new period of wealth creation and generation and this transition into the information age. If people haven't read the book The Sovereign Individual from 1997, I'd highly recommend that. It's very prescient. But there's this currency chaos and this banking chaos, it's going to lead to civil, it's going to morph from finance to economic to social to political to geopolitical turmoil and crisis. And if you're in equity-based instruments like Bitcoin and gold and real estate, then I think you can, protect and do very well in this wealth transfer and this wealth generation, and also doing other things like alternate citizenships and residencies and things like that. It all kind of plays together because as these fiat currencies collapse, they're just the common stocks of these organizations, of these states. And when they get desperate, they get crazy. And you just want to have yourself in a position where you don't have to deal with the crazy.
Well, before we finish off, Jason, if you don't mind, Trace just led me up to a perfect plug. I'm an anarcho-capitalist, so he mentioned residencies and passports, and we help people get residencies and passports in foreign countries at tddpassports.com. And we've started up a libertarian community in Chile, which is one of the freest countries on earth right now, where you can buy real estate, foreign real estate, which is another great way to salvage some of your wealth during this coming collapse, and that's just galtzchile.com.
Okay, a couple last things here. I'll just add in my 2 cents. I personally think now Bitcoin, after hearing all this, and I had this before we were recording the podcast, I think Bitcoin is a very good, at the very minimum, hedge to people's physical gold and silver positions. But from what it sounds like it's after going through this podcast, it sounds like it's a lot more than that. Now,
where'd he go?
Oh, now you're back. Okay, start again, Jason. You cut out.
Okay. I would just say that I think Bitcoin is a great hedge for the gold and silver bugs out there who say, I hate Bitcoin, I'll never buy it. Just putting all your eggs in one basket, gold and silver, you don't know what the governments are going to do. You don't know if they're going to change the rules. You'd have to have, a lot of physical metal stored all over the world. For a lot of people, that's not financially possible to be diversified precious metals. I think Bitcoin is a great hedge to physical precious metals holdings at the very minimum, and it sounds like there's a lot of upside on top of that.
Yeah, and just, Jason, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just like a couple points on that, I wrote a free Bitcoin guide for people to get started and learn how to get into this space. It's at freebitcoinguide.com, and I just had, Chris Duane, he spewed a whole bunch of crap, and then he refused to debate me on the merits of gold and Bitcoin and stuff. And this was back when it took 5 Bitcoins to buy 1 ounce of silver. And now it takes 5 ounces of silver to buy 1 Bitcoin. And so the interesting thing about the free market is it rewards the solutions. And what the Bitcoin price is saying is that it's a solution to all of these problems out there. So, I think people should take a good hard look at it and experiment with it a little bit and then make their decisions on whether or not they want to allocate some capital into it.
Very good. And thank you very much, guys, for your time, and hopefully we can have you, each of you separately on again, or maybe we'll do a roundtable like this later in the future. And to Gabe, sorry about getting kicked off, and we'll have you back on, too, hopefully to talk about Bitcoin, and thank you for participating in this roundtable. I'm sure our listeners, including myself, have learned a lot about Bitcoin.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jason.